to pass along questions to panelists, and we'll do our best to answer questions either in real time or when we get to them during question and answer. So please feel free to add your email address to the chat with your questions or the Q&A, and we can also email a response or follow up with you after the discussion today. The chat is only seen by the panelists. So, and we're now live streaming on Facebook. So welcome everyone. My name is Megan Dunn. I'm a Snohomish County Council member and chair of the County Council. I represent District 2, which includes Everett, Mukilteo, and Tulalip. I appreciate everyone's time today. We'll go ahead and get started. We are here today to provide reliable and accurate information on housing and homelessness. In my time on the County Council, I've worked closely with the community and local human service providers. I volunteered for the point in time count and at recovery centers. I've toured homeless day centers and shelters and recovery centers and food banks. And I've responded to numerous constituents in need of resources to help them get back on their feet. I've heard from residents unable to get housing because of the wait list for affordable housing vouchers, and I've been leading monthly calls that bring together our human service providers from across Snohomish County. And all of these experiences have a common thread. Snohomish County does not have adequate affordable housing, emergency sheltering, supportive permanent housing, or behavioral health services and substance abuse and recovery services to address the extraordinary need that we have here in our community. People are hurting and our community at large is impacted. So we see the results of this crisis when we pass by a tent encampment or step over human waste when we visit downtown areas or when shop owners open their stores. We see it when there's a family sleeping in their car or when we have we see a person having a behavioral health crisis on the street and we feel like there's nowhere to turn to and we don't know who to call. Working class families feel it when they pay more than 50% of their income on rent despite working full-time jobs. And we hear about it on the news when neighbors have concerns relating to public safety. We've all been impacted one way or another by housing affordability and homelessness. So homelessness and lack of services in our county is a real problem. And this panel today is going to dive into the issue, talk through our historic and current barriers to equitable access to housing, and present some actionable ways that we can address this crisis. So first, we're going to go around and have our panelists introduce themselves, which organization they represent, and a little bit about their background on housing work that they've been working on. So first, we'll hear from Chris.
All right, thank you for the introduction, Megan. My name is Chris Collier. I'm the program manager for the Alliance for Housing Affordability, which is a municipal collaboration between Snohomish County jurisdictions, including the county and the Housing Authority, to help the cities understand and respond to housing affordability in their communities.
Great, and next we'll go to Jackie.
Hi, good afternoon. I'm Jackie Julian. I'm the inaugural ED for Communities of Color Coalition. In short, we are a by-4 organization, working to dismantle racism. And so a number of things that we do across our county or region is we focus on policy and procedure and practices. And so our current work, includes a statewide pilot study program with lived experts as it relates to homelessness. And we're currently advocating and highlighting our state's chronic the disproportionate rates as it relates to homelessness as it impacts our Black and Brown communities further than our white, in addition to the services that they're not accessing as it relates to homelessness. Thank you.
Thank you. And Mindy?
Hi, thank you, Megan, for putting this together. I'm Mindy Woods. I go by she, her pronouns. I have lived experience with homelessness 2 times in the county in the last 10 years as a single mom with a then 13-year-old, and then again when he was 18. I have, from that experience, got involved with the Washington Low Income Housing Alliance, which I now serve as a board member. But prior to that, got involved in the Resident Action Project, which is a statewide network made up of people with lived experience who have either gone through homelessness or have experienced housing injustice. And we use our stories to come together to impact change in policy on local municipality levels on up to state levels and even national. And with a big emphasis on systemic racism and the barriers for our BIPOC communities. So thank you for having me.
Thank you. Beth.
Hi, I'm Beth Dolio, and I also thank Councilmember Dunn for organizing this today, this very important conversation in communities across the state. My time working on housing issues dates back to when I was a board member in the 90s on the Solid Ground Board of Directors. And I spent evenings, nights, sleeping at an overflow shelter for the day center, Angeline's Day Center in downtown Seattle during the 90s as well. I ran for the legislature in part because of our housing crisis and was able to pass several bills, particularly around funding for the creation of additional permanent supportive housing units. And I currently serve as the vice chair of Quixote Communities that has several villages, primarily serving homeless veterans. They're tiny houses with a community center, and it's a really fantastic model in both Pierce County and Thurston County. And we are working on building one in Shelton. So really happy to join the panel today and look forward to delving into these issues more deeply.
Great. Well, let's get started with a baseline for how we're measuring affordable housing in Snohomish County. So this first kind of topic is for Chris. Chris, how affordable is housing in Snohomish County? I think you're going to share your screen, right?
Yep, I'm going to share my screen. I'll take 5 minutes. I've practiced to respond to the questions generally about how do we measure housing affordability. When we talk about housing affordability, we have to recognize that we are on a housing continuum. Oh, there we go. We're on a housing continuum. What happens at the home ownership level on the far right has downstream effects on market rate rental housing, income restricted, income-based rental housing, supportive housing, and so on. Even though the tools to address them are distinct, the tools and programs to address each level on this housing continuum are different. When you put pressure on one end, you feel it at the other end. This is a Newton's cradle, and so I'm talking mostly about the market side of things, and I'll conclude with income restricted housing. So in the regional context for why we're having this discussion, why it's important to have this conversation today starts with how many homes we have. If you count the number of homes we built, minus out the number of households that were created, you get this annual surplus of housing units. 1,100 more housing units were created in 2003 compared to new households that were created to occupy them. Obviously, this adds up over time, and something dramatic happens in 2015, 16, 17, and 18. Out to 2021, where we have basically margin of error territory, levels of housing around zero. We could be, and this is supported by the Northwest Multiple Listing Service that reports we have 6 days of inventory in our housing supply. 6 days. It should be 6 months. As you'd expect, this has had a dramatic impact on the actual price of housing. This line is the median sale price for a single-family detached home in Snohomish County adjusted for inflation. This is reported from the county assessor's property sales records. Now, this is not what you need to make to access a home. You need loan terms. So given typical loan terms that you see in fine print across the bottom, 3.5% interest, 30-year term, 10% down, 26% debt to income ratio. That's how much of your income can go to your home loan, your mortgage, and no other debt obligations, student loans, car payments, credit card bills, and so on. This is what you need to make, $157,000 to get a loan on that $700,000 house. This is what the median household actually makes. The degree to which these lines have diverged and separated is the start of our problem. As you'd expect, people that can't own a single-family home will look at townhomes and condos. Those that can't own townhomes and condos will be looking for rentals. And the rental market has responded as you would expect. In a situation of scarcity, rents have risen considerably. So digging into this a little more, I'm trying to keep this under 5 minutes. This is the median sale price on the table for single-family home and townhome condo products in each city, and over that city, you'll see the required income for each of those products. City of Linwood, City of Mountlake Terrace, Mill Creek, over $1 million in Edmonds and Mill Creek, Mukilteo, bringing up the rear of the trifecta of very expensive, Everett, Lake Stevens, and the City of Snohomish. Now, looking at who makes what, this is from the Bureau of Labor Statistics looking at the Puget Sound region. This is King, Snohomish, and Pierce County occupations rolled into one. And you can see that a physicist makes between, at the 25th percentile, $108,000 a year, $182,000 at the 75th percentile. They cannot afford to live in most of Southwest Snohomish County. Emergency management directors and administrative law judges. There's not a lot of judges, but I put that in to remind us that if your kids or you call your parents and say, Mom, Dad, I'm a judge. Culture says your ship has come in. You can live wherever you want to. But this shows that that is no longer the case. By the way, those judges are competing with audiologists who you'll need if you have any kind of hearing, need any kind of healthcare around your hearing, for these 4 affordable places in Southwest Snohomish County. And you might say, well, fine, they can all live there, except that those 4 cities represent 557 sales in 2020. And there are 435,000 workers in the Puget Sound region that make between $99,000 and $69,000 a year at the median in their occupation. Just how much have things changed and how fast, city by city? We see the percentage change in 5-year groups, 2000 to 2004, about 15% average, maybe a little less. 2005 to 2009, Mill Creek and Monroe have already experienced the recession. 2010 to 2014, the recession grips everywhere else except Edmonds. Then 2015 to 2019, 2020 to 21, and the net change. So let me back up. This is 15 years. Then here come the next 7 years of change in home prices. Things are fundamentally different today than they were 10 years ago. We are in a different era in Snohomish County's housing history. Final slide, what this means for affordable housing is in 2019, we had 77,355 households qualifying as very low income. That's below $55,000 a year if your household size is 3. So we have 77,000. How many of them can we support? How many of them can we serve? The Housing Authority can serve 6,200 between their income restricted units and their voucher portfolio. Everett Housing Authority, 3,600. Income restricted units not owned by either housing authority, 10,000. Leaving 56,000 households that qualify as very low income with no assistance at all. This is why we need to hear from Mindy and Jackie and Beth. So I'll hand it over to them. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. I know you could talk for an hour on this topic or more.
Definitely more.
So how do we make that slice of the pie bigger so we have less of an unmet need or just no unmet need? We know that not everyone has equitable access to home ownership or rental properties, not just in Snohomish County, but across the nation. So this next topic is for Jackie. What are some of the historic barriers and exclusions to accessing housing for our BIPOC communities?
Yeah, thank you. One, giving honor to my elders and my ancestors, and also acknowledging that I stand on the traditional lands of the Coast Salish people. Also want to recognize the means and methods in which such lands were stolen, occupied, and dispersed. I acknowledge the dignity and honor in which the Coast Salish people tribes struggled. That being said, I think that's the framework where starting this conversation as far as like the barriers. And it's important, one, to acknowledge our history and its ripe roots of injustice as it relates to, one, exclusion of being recognized, one, as a human. We have many glossed over truths in our nation, right, and our founding principles in construction. And with that, I will say, right, referencing back to our Constitution, where Black folks were 3/5, right, of a person. That being said, that one, putting in a context, not one, it's reported. So it's been reported when we put like 3/5 of a person, right? And so the foundation of our construction, that 12.5 million enslaved Africans were transported between 1500 and 1866. It's important to start a conversation there because it's the formula, one, that created our housing segregation. It is the very reason we're currently seeing a housing crisis. Again, not only do I come into this work advocating to dismantle the systems, one, that have set up, right, these injustices and put a cast, right, on the Black and Brown communities. It also continues, right, to perpetuate those systems. And so I not only bring lived experience, I bring a multitude of things. One, that historically, like these practices, these disparities, right, have been driven from a multitude of things, discrimination that are woven into our policies, both in public and private, whether, we are referencing, white mob violence against African Americans. For those folks that aren't familiar with C3 as an organization, we were established right from a cross burning in the city of Arlington. So it's a handful of community members. And so if you're familiar with our towns and our communities, as Black and brown bodies, we don't feel safe. There are many forms of neighborhood-based racial discrimination that contribute to the current disparities. And right within redlining as a system. There's also more recently the rise of lending practices that continue to target Black and brown communities. We know this, right, historically, just certain laws that have been placed when we had the 2008, right, crisis. But a large contributing factor is that when we take that framework and we put it into context, is that one, that Black and brown communities, have shifted from being objects of economic exclusion to targets for financial exploitation. And that plays out in our housing market. Even such cases of Black and brown body folks, families being offered less, right, when they're listing their house. So there's many of one gaps, and we think about who was allowed to own land, and we think about generational wealth, how that's achievable, how that's transferred from one generation to the next. We have to acknowledge that we have been excluded from that. Not only have we been excluded, a large part of the challenges specifically, it's not unique to our county, but it is definitely a constant chronic problem that we have. Challenge is that the solutions, the folks that have caused the most harm are then charted with creating solutions moving forward, which only further exacerbate further disparities. Another challenge within our county is that, for Snohomish County, asking folks to disaggregate the data as it relates to, when we look at who's mostly impacted. So outside of having lived experience, who's mostly impacted, and providing aid to those that are in crisis. We still are arguing amongst ourselves of the importance of disaggregating data. So I'll offer 5 minutes to go through a whole history of some challenges and barriers. Definitely going to reference and direct your attention to redlining and understanding again the construction of how this not only was the construction of our current policies and injustices, but how it's continually woven through the fabric of how we operate. And there are many examples of as far as the harm of those creating, whether it be in 1968, they passed the Housing and Urban Development Act, and the intention was to establish to induce mortgage, but it only discovered that it established, it further perpetuated harms on Black and brown communities. So I think that I want to be mindful of my time, but I think that the biggest challenge for us is that when it comes to creating solutions, Black and brown bodies and those closest to the problem are excluded from engaging in charting the course of creating the solutions. And so that what continues to be a chronic issue across not only our county, but across our state. Thank you.
Thank you, Jackie. We're getting some questions in the Q&A, so feel free to put questions in there. We can answer as we go along, or we'll also have a time at the end for questions and diving deeper into some of these topics. We know the county has a number of ways that people can access emergency housing and rental assistance. So this next section is for Mindy. If you can talk about the current options for people needing emergency housing or affordable housing, and how does someone navigate that system?
Sure. So, yeah, there are several ways. Unfortunately, it's the wait time that is such a huge barrier. So currently, when somebody is in need of rent assistance, they can call the county resource line 211. And right now, the 211 is operated by Volunteers of America, and they received CARES funding as well as some of the American Rescue Plan Act funding. And that is what they're using for rent assistance. Right now, they have thousands of people in the queue waiting to get a call back. The current wait time, first of all, just calling and getting through to 211, depending on the day and the time of the day of the week, can be up to a 2-hour wait just to get through. Other days, it's much shorter. I know that they are busy trying to hire more 211 operators to help speed that process along. But that takes some time to find people and to train them and get them up to speed as to, the different programs and all of that. But once you're able to get through and ask for rental assistance, the average wait time right now is 8 to 10 weeks just to get the call back to start your process. So that's 2 months of rent that you have not been able to come up with unless you've got family members or some other source. So that right there is a huge, huge problem for the county, but that just speaks to the need. They have been able to assist, I think it's close to 8,000 people in the last, several months. But when they reopened the portal after the first of the year on January 1st, they got 2,000 new applications in 48 hours. That is how great the need is right now. There is such a lack of affordable housing, but the other big issue is rents have been rising astronomically, and it is a form of economic eviction. I know that landlords have been hurting as well throughout this COVID nightmare in the last 2 years, but I'm hearing of rent raises of $100, $200, $600, $1,000 and more. And Chris can attest to that as well. And I'm sure Jackie can as well. These are just astronomical rent increases, but wages certainly have not matched that type of increase, right? So that is just creating even a larger gap between those that can keep that roof over their head and those that are having to make really difficult choices between, do I get insulin? Do I pay the electricity bill? Do I fix put a tire on the car so I can still get to my, job? These are really, really hard choices. And so this is also adding to the enormous load that 211 is having to endure. And then if somebody, the city of Edmonds, in full disclosure, I do work part-time as the city of Edmonds Human Services Program Manager. We do have a rental assistance or a household support program. That C3 is one of our partner organizations helping to disperse those funds, but is only for residents within the city of Edmonds. So that's we in Edmonds, you can live in some unincorporated areas that unfortunately the way that federal funds work, we're not able to help those folks. So there are very few cities that actually have their own rental assistance program right now or rental assistance funds available. So that everybody then is having to call 211. And so like I said, 8 to 10 week wait list. The other thing is if somebody has a Section 8 voucher, if they're able to call the housing authority and get a voucher or some kind of project-based voucher, you have to be able to find not only a landlord that is willing to participate in that program and accept that voucher, but then do they have a unit that's available? I happen to live in a building that does accept vouchers. We don't have any available units. And I was on a voucher in the past. And when you find a place and a landlord that accepts those vouchers, you are less likely to move because you know that the options are very few and far between. So people are hanging on to those units as long as they can. And those that are on the wait list, that wait list is years long right now. In fact, it's for the Housing Authority of Snohomish County, it's not even open. Correct, Chris? It's not even open to the public right now.
A few programs are.
A few programs. Okay.
A few, but not, yeah.
Yeah. And then once you have that voucher, you have a timeline of when you have to use that voucher. You have to find an address to attach that voucher to. So again, with very few housing options available that are affordable and available, that just creates that much of a bigger pool of people who are desperately in need. there is, so then you think about, okay, if somebody has lost their housing, then shelter. So I hear time and time again, people say, oh, there's shelters available. People just need to go to a shelter and, problem solved. I will let you know that in South Snohomish County, there is one shelter at all, and that is in Linwood, and it's the YWCA Pathways for Women. It is a shelter for women and children only. It is a 2 to 4 month wait list right now. And it doesn't matter, how great your need is. You've got a child with medical needs. You've got a woman with disabilities. It's a 2 to 4 month wait list. Outside of that, there's a shelter out, the Monroe Women's Shelter. It's a 9-bed shelter. They too, depends on the day, may have a bed or 2 available, may not. Otherwise, it's Everett for the Gospel Mission. There is their system. They have both men and women's shelter, and you go up there and you wait in line, and then they will conduct intake interviews from 10 to 12, Monday through Friday. And out of that 2-hour interview period, they can only take in 1, 2, maybe 3 people at most. So everybody else is still on that wait list and waiting. So there's not shelter capacity. And with COVID, that is also limited or put a lot of barriers on shelters as to how many people they can take in. The cold weather shelters South County only opens when it is 34 degrees or colder, and it is volunteer run. So again, COVID has impacted so many of these different types of programs, but we had a housing crisis even before COVID. It's just exacerbated the problem. Coordinated entry, if you are unhoused, you can call 211 and ask to be in the coordinated entry program. Currently, the last data collected, there were 916 people on that list, and that is people who are waiting to be connected to a resource navigator who will then help to assist them in trying to find housing. Unfortunately, they are not able to house, that right now they're housing less than 10% of that number of people. So 916 on the wait list, and less than 10% are able to even find housing, because again, the shortage of available and affordable units to house people is few and far between. So, we've got a crisis on our hands, and this is the time when we need people to step up and contact their legislators and get involved in some of the different bills that are being heard. You can testify, you can write in, you can just call, you can email, however you want to do that. But this is the time to let your lawmakers know, both on city, county, as well as state levels. We have a crisis. This is what's happened to me. Please help. And more of these stories that are shared, this is how we're able to educate our lawmakers and our policymakers, as well as be able to be part of that, moving that needle. But I will also say, to Jackie's point, that homelessness impacts our Black and Brown communities at a much greater proportion than our white counterparts. And this is another part of what the organization that I'm involved with is doing, is to help highlight those disparities and point out the discriminatory practices, and to make those policy changes as well. So there's a lot of work to be done. There is hope, but it does take all of us coming together. This is a we problem. This is not one person's problem or that person's problem. This is a we problem as a community, and we all need to come together to create those solutions.
Thank you, Mindy. So let's hear from Beth on some of those solutions. During your time at the state legislature, what were some measures that the state passed to help with housing affordability? And are there any new and emerging solutions, such as ones Mindy was just mentioning, that you would like to highlight? Thank you.
Well, first of all, I just want to start off by thanking you, Megan, for really your leadership in passing one of the tools that I helped enable for local governments in 1590. So Snohomish County just recently passed that measure. That will generate about $23 million annually to help build housing and to support housing with the services. It's a very flexible, locally controlled source of money. And I was the prime sponsor of that bill in 2020, I believe. What happened in my community is in 2017, communities did have the option to bring that measure forward, that funding option forward to the voters. And my community did that. Took us 3 years from start to finish to get it across the finish line. And as I was coming into the legislature, local government officials, elected leaders were coming to me saying, we are on the front lines of this issue and we don't have the resources or the tools to respond. This is not what local government has been geared to do, but that's where we find ourselves. And so I went to work and got 1590 passed to make sure that there was a councilmanic option for communities so that they could do it more rapidly than having to bring it to the voters. In fact, people are elected. We elect them to make these decisions. And when there's a crisis, they need to be able to respond quickly. And so that's the history of 1590. In Olympia, where it's been in existence for a while, I'm happy to report that we just opened Unity Commons, which is a 60-person shelter and also a 60-unit permanent supportive housing, and they are placed right next to one another. And because we have this continual local source of income into our city's coffers, we've been able to attract phase 2 and phase 3 in the pipeline already. And that's what it takes, because we are 225,000 units short of housing in this state. 225,000 units short. We need to build, and we need to build quickly, and we need to take advantage also of the current infrastructure that we have. So, and I also just want to quickly mention a number of other communities have passed 1590 in all corners of this state, and it's generating about $131 million annually now to help communities respond to this crisis that we have. I'm going to talk a little bit about 1866, a bill that is being prime sponsored by Representative Chop. Mindy Woods testified on it. We had a wonderful hearing and was hearing from the health community, because what this bill does that's unique is it combines the healthcare authority and Medicaid with the housing issue, recognizing that if we can get people into housing, we can actually save money. 82% fewer emergency room visits, 61% fewer hospital admissions, and 80% shorter hospital stays if we have people housed. And we all know that there's a lot of people, unfortunately, living on our streets right now that are not housed and are using these other services that are paid for with our public dollars. If we invest in housing and we provide services to keep people in those housing, because we know through research that 70% of the people who are chronically homeless struggle with a health condition, including mental illness, substance use disorder, and significant physical disabilities. So they need homes and they need services to help them stay in those homes. And we don't just need housing at that, for those 0 to 60% average median income. We need housing at all levels of income. As Chris so beautifully pointed out with his PowerPoint, and that's where zoning comes in. And the person who replaced me in the legislature, Representative Jessica Bateman, has a Governor Request Bill 1782, which addresses zoning. And this is where we are able to build more units using existing infrastructure and existing homes so that we can quickly increase our supply of housing. And so those are the two bills that I think that are very significant at play in the legislature this year, along with taking those ARPA dollars that we have and really focusing them in to build housing through the Housing Trust Fund in our state. So there is an ask out there, $500 million going into our Housing Trust Fund to help with those capital dollars and some operating capacity as well through the bill 1866, the Apple Health and Homes bill. So that is a little 5-minute sketch of where we are in the legislature and a little bit of past history of where we have been.
Thank you. Thank you, Beth. We've gotten a couple questions in the Q&A. We're able to answer a few. I had a few questions to ask first, and then we can address some that have been submitted. But Chris, is there,
Megan, also, if I may, I wanted to make comment because there's a couple of things, one that were mentioned, Con, as it relates to me and or C3. One being supporting in rental assistance. We're currently supporting in two capacities. One, on a county level, we are a subcontractor for Volunteers of America. And so when we talked about, Mindy talked about just the many challenges of folks having been shoveled to one service, so 2-in-1, for example. We don't currently have a system that is set up in place to support the needs of our community. Therefore, we shovel and funnel, right? It's like we want a one-stop shop. When that's reality, that's never going to get us to where we need to be. So therefore, right, we're causing, I don't know the number you shared, Mindy, but right, hundreds and thousands of people to wait in one line because they can only access this service if they go through this door. That being, right, those folks that receive the funding to distribute funding. We on a county level are not able to distribute funding. We're able to process an application, help families, right, fill out that application, help them understand, help them identify other resources in their crisis, but we don't, right, we have no control over that. In addition, bringing Edmonds into, we do support in that capacity. However, as I mentioned, right, there's many ways that we need to collectively sit down and identify the mechanisms, one that are the intersections that, right, impact the laws and the structures that we're aiming out, right, to set forth and provisions and supports we're aiming to provide to communities, because oftentimes those are the very barriers that exclude me from accessing the services that I need. And we have folks, again, that are 3 or 4 times removed from the issue, not addressing, right, the solutions. And even in that, across the county, right, without disaggregating the data, we are not able to, even though we are able to identify these are the challenges and then equities in the systems. For example, is it fair in the city of Edmonds that a household of 8 is eligible for the same $2,500 that a household of 1 is eligible on a retired income? That's an inequity for me. But where do we address these, right? We don't have control. So again, those that, right, are working to address the inequities, the decision making is done prior to us engaging in the conversation. Furthermore, I want to highlight that, anytime that there is a crisis, COVID being, right, that crisis, even though we are in 2 pandemics, it further exacerbates the disparities for the Black and Brown communities. COVID is no different. We are seeing that is very, right, that is very real for us. And so also, in addition, I think that a large part is, how our government representation matters. It's not, I'm not worried about, it matters as we prioritize, right, profit over people. And so while we want to engage in, right, we need to have X amount of housing, we don't focus on the intersections. And again, addressing those that are closest to the problem. We want a one-stop shop, quick solution, and that's not going to get us there. So happy to have folks engage and join us, right? We have a monthly general membership meeting as we address these very issues and, right, look to support one another because this is challenging work. Yeah, we need to lean in.
thank you for adding that, Jackie, and engage before the decision is made. I appreciate that. I wanted to ask Chris about the housing voucher program. Is that still effective, or how hard is it to get a housing voucher right now? We heard a little bit from our panelists, but do you want to expand on that a little bit?
Yep. I'll share very quickly 3 little bits of information. 1, the voucher program is extraordinarily helpful and absolutely worthy of praise. That being said, it's being overwhelmed, as Mindy alluded to. It's a 7 to 10 year wait, depending on the voucher program you're in the line for. 7 to 10 year wait. Looking at data from the Housing Authority's voucher portfolio, once a household receives a voucher, in 2019, it took 55 days for that voucher to be applied. That is now 62 days in 2021. That 7 days might not sound like much, but that matters. It might lead to the reason that the success rate of applying a voucher in a unit is down by 4%, from 85 to 81% in the same time period, 2019 to 2021. It is getting harder and harder and harder to apply vouchers for the reasons that Mindy described. But the program is absolutely worthy of praise. It's just harder to use it in the environment we're swimming in.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Brock had a question about if the county is supporting current legislation that would eliminate single-family zoning near high-capacity transit stations. So I think you're referring to House Bill 1782 and Senate Bill 5670. The county has not taken a position on that bill. We're hearing some concerns from our cities that it would be preempting their land use authority. So our county has not taken a position on that bill. So I'll just answer that one. No, I've never done the Q&A. Also had a question from Brooke asking when will we receive an update on the 1/10 of 1% sales tax for affordable housing? How soon can affordable housing be built after the tax funds are received? So I know that the paperwork has been processed and we'll start collecting funds in April. Do you have a sense, Chris, or I'm not sure who would be best to answer it for how long it would take? I know there's a number of projects that are in the kind of design phase, and we have a 5-year plan for spending out those first 5-year allocations, but anything to add?
It's just a multi-month turnaround from adoption of the measure to actual collection from revenue. After that, it's up to the county process. So it will be a few months until that money actually hits the county's county control.
Okay. And
Yeah,
we'll
and
have,
my sense in the county is that there are a number of projects that are, kind of ready to go. And, these projects actually take a significant amount of energy to pull the resources together, determine, who you're serving, find the land, get the permits, actually get it built. It doesn't happen overnight. The one thing that is happening overnight with the use of these funds is rapid rehousing, where you're purchasing like a hotel. It's not really overnight, but it's a much faster process, or an already created apartment building and renovating that and retrofitting that into permanent supportive housing. And that is an approach that King County has been using with the use of $1590. They bonded against it and have purchased a number of hotels. But Snohomish County is blessed with a number of really very high quality, well-run nonprofits that are providing housing. And so this measure that the county passed will help those projects happen more quickly, the ones that are already in the pipeline.
perfect. Yeah, we were looking at some different options for emergency sheltering and more immediate needs in the first couple years. And then the long-term sustainable housing would be coming later as those projects move through the development phase. And we'll have quarterly updates. So the county will be, we'll have quarterly updates on how that money is being spent and where it's going. So let's see. I don't know if you guys want to answer some specific questions. Larry asked Beth to comment on House Bill 1337. Do you feel this would help with the housing needs?
Luckily, I saw that question and I looked up the bill. That's the work of Representative Mia Gregerson, who's been working on this ADU bill for several years now. I just, in terms of the moving away from single family zoning, this is another bill that helps to utilize infrastructure that's already in place, homes that are already in place, and making better use of that space to house more people in within our growth management bounds. This is kind of where I believe climate and housing really intersect. We don't want to be building new infrastructure and moving out into the rural areas. Instead, we want to densify our urban areas. That's a very important climate. The more dense, the fewer the emissions are, and the more people we can house, and the fewer people that we have facing housing shortages and actually ending up on the streets. So I'm supportive of Representative Gregerson's work. She's been incredibly tenacious about this work.
And we had a similar question from John around accessory dwelling units, or ADUs and DADUs, also around rezoning R1 and R2 parcels to increase ability for building more homes. So it sounds like just if we're having our density in urban areas where they have resources, where they have structures in place, we're getting more availability for housing and more people to go. Any other comments Yeah, around ADUs and DADUs or infill.
I would just share that infill generally is a natural evolution of our communities, as we have seen in other urban centers worldwide throughout human history. In the long, long scope of human history, communities must be allowed to change. You can call that infill if you want, you can call it something else. Communities have to be allowed to change, and the more you try to hold back the tide, the more difficult and turbulent it's going to be once you get to that place. So that's something for us to consider. That's all.
Yeah, perfect. I was gonna see if there's a good question for Mindy or Jackie. Well, I'll turn to Jackie. So how can people joining today best support BIPOC communities and equitable access to housing? More of the for us, by us movement that you were speaking to earlier. So what are some ways that you would like to see people helping in that way, Jackie?
Yeah, I think when there's a multitude of things that I see in one of the comments, somebody mentioned on one just right now, PSRC's vision, right, for the 2020s as it relates to transportation. There's one happening, right, that are setting like the foundation, right, the structure of like what our county is going to look like. But to answer your question, I would again go back to gathering data, right, looking at statistically what are we looking at, making sure we have a capture of our county, the challenges, and also perhaps the areas of right where we see success. That being said, we have a general membership meeting where we meet regularly, right? We are constantly in conversation with a multitude of communities because the challenges, right, in Granite Falls differ from the challenges in Stanwood or Marysville or Everett, for example. Although we know our county across the board, we have a blatant Proud Boy racism problem that one further, right, creates harm. It is rather, I do want to acknowledge that we do have folks, that reach out to us, right, and want to advocate without, right, being on the front lines, and that's okay. The best way to contact us would be info@c3coalition.org for any general information. I'm happy to share the advocacy efforts as it relates to the work we're doing. We're currently picking up work, continuing on a statewide study that I had shared around lived experts as it relates to experiencing homelessness. In addition to what Beth had shared about, the relationship to health conditions and those that are houseless. One, we know that Black and brown bodies are disproportionately misdiagnosed when it comes to right health services. In addition to that, when you as a Black and brown body, when you access services, when we look at state data, it also tells us that the current services that are in place as it relates to those that are experiencing houselessness and homelessness, we're not accessing those services. So that means the current services that are being offered, we're not accessing. It's not right meeting our needs. And so when we go and all these things fold into right a multitude of these intersections to perpetuate and keep those rather in crisis. That being said, right, if we're looking at our numbers and prioritizing, how are we creating, protecting those that are being most harmed in this process, right? We know that we have a problem across our county, but what are we doing as leaders and individuals, as advocates, to protect those that are being most harmed? How are we prioritizing and centering their voices, not including, but centering their voices? And so I would say, start there. Yeah, happy to continue and reach out to me.
Thank you. I wanted to see if Mindy had anything to add. We had a comment from Sue about working in rapid rehousing and clients finding very few openings to apply for because the market is so tight. So do you have any other suggestions for helping remove some of the barriers that Jackie's mentioning, and also Sue, and just the need for more services? Any magic wand solution?
I think, this is such a huge and complex problem that it's going to take a lot of different solutions. It's not going to be one, but right now is a prime time to get involved. This is legislative session. We're in a short session. We only have 6 weeks left. And next week happens to be Housing and Homelessness Advocacy Days, and it's going to be virtual. And so anybody can participate, but this is where the Washington Low Income Housing Alliance has set up a designated time with lawmakers of every district, and to bring together folks from those districts to be able to have those conversations with their lawmakers and tell them, both as service providers or as individuals, just concerned citizens. Again, this is a we problem. This takes everybody as part of the solution. So this is where your voice can be heard, and where and if you can't attend those, then you again, write to your lawmakers, call them, email them, but they're there for you. They work for us. And this is where we need to let them know what is really going on. And certainly for those that are in the service provider or human services industry, the different nonprofits, you are the boots on the ground. And this is where your voices need to be heard. And get involved with the Washington Low Income Housing Alliance, because they are the membership organization for the state that brings together all of these different organizations, grassroots, agencies, counties, et cetera, to come together to talk about these different issues and to form the policies, or to influence those policies, and to work with our state representation. So, and then again, for those who have lived experience, our resident action project, this is again where we can bring together the voices of those of us who have that lived experience, because it's going to be those that have that experience that are going to impact the change. So couple of ways to get involved there, but right now is prime time to get our voices out there in front of our policymakers.
Yeah, go ahead, Chris.
So I used to work for Governor Inslee in constituent services. So if you ever wrote, called, or emailed, I was probably the one reading it a couple of years ago. That's something, what Mindy said is absolutely correct. If there are no resources available, there's no secret stash of resources that are underutilized that we can discover with really hard work. We need to make more. And that means calling your legislators. It means making it known that you, as their constituent, want to see that happen in session, or city council or county council. And that doesn't have to be a big, long, heartfelt email. All you need to say is, I support this issue, or I support the concept of housing affordability, housing variety, income restricted housing, whatever you want to say. So, and then conclude with, so please vote for whatever measure is at hand. That's all you need to say. Nothing else that you will write will make it in front of the legislator. All you need to say is that, and that's all. That's that easy. Call, email, write. That's that easy.
And my understanding is that Paula is putting together some resources for folks who are attending today. And I did include, I sent her the link to the Washington Low Income Housing Alliance action list that you can sign up, and you'll get regular updates about what's most strategic to weigh in on, and what issues are, what their agenda is. And so that, they were the ones who helped, mostly with getting 1590 across the finish line. And so very effective nonprofit. And it sounds like Jackie's nonprofit is doing fantastic work as well. And what an opportunity for you in Snohomish County to participate there as well.
Yeah, let me just ask one more question that came up a few times in the Q&A, and then we'll share that resource slide and also turn to everybody for kind of closing remarks, because we have about 5 minutes left. But there were two questions around, well, one called it co-modification of housing and investment firms driving up the cost of housing by using funds to outbid individuals. Luisana asked more in terms of saying that it's not necessarily there isn't enough stock or housing, but we're allowing outside investors to buy up property. So Chris, you answered those. Can you give a kind of quick answer for that?
Yeah, it's something that's not well understood or well tracked in data, but I see both a very valid reason for pursuing that action, but at the same time, that gets you on a difficult path where you're saying that people can't own a single family residence to rent. I don't know the answer to that political question, but that's one that needs to be answered. My preferred answer, instead of going in that route, is having enough freedom in the market so that the market can produce housing such that it's not profitable, it's not worth most people's time and effort to run a rental property. Because right now it is outrageously profitable. I live in a townhome north of Linwood. I'm lucky to have been able to get this place. But if my neighbors are moving out, they're not selling because they can make over $1,000 more than their mortgage by renting that place out. And they'd be foolish not to do that because that's what the market supports right now. And the market dynamics should change around that financial calculation that current owners or landlords are making.
I'm going to jump in here too, Megan, just because I think that, like, you know, it just aligns, right, serendipitous with something I read yesterday. And so the question or the comment that has been posed to us, right, is allowing outside investors to buy up the property. As I mentioned when I talked about, right, one of the challenges is just generational wealth, right, and how that one forever structures and sets someone up favorably, changes the trajectory of one's life. Well, in many cases, investors, right, and or large businesses, we're going to take Amazon, for example. If you Google Amazon in Everett and daycare, right, you'll get be caught up to speed. That being said, they're not even buying property, right? Our county is proposing to provide a space free of charge to someone who has the most money, right? That doesn't make sense. And so ultimately, again, we as individuals, leaders, making the choices and decisions, and people like, how do I engage? Reach out to your local elected officials, your city council, hold them accountable. When we do a call to action, come join us, stand in solidarity, because that's not changing, right? That's not changing anything for our communities. Having something that seems right, well intended, it just creates further harm. And I would be particularly curious of, like, what would a community-based approach look like? What would it look like if we prioritize that same, right? If we're going to give this huge institution, this billion-dollar organization money, right? Free space. What if we gave community free space? How would that what would that look like in 10, 15, 20, 30, 40 years from now? Like, we have to be mindful that the decisions we're making, they're not just impacting today or because it looks good, right? And it's going to bring folks into our community. We are exacerbating these problems. We are perpetuating them. And that's when we need to, a really right call to attention and then explore of how do we avoid, right? And how do we call those things out?
Yeah. And maybe the flip side is incentivizing or having land trusts, or what can we do to make home ownership more of a goal that could be accomplished by anyone. So we had the final word. I don't know if we have time for a final word, but in the last minute, I'll just ask Chris any final words, and then Mindy.
Yep. Everyone has a voice. Everyone has lived in a place, has sheltered in one way or another. And so everyone has a valid voice to be shared on housing, and you should feel empowered to share it.
Thank you. Mindy, then Beth.
Yes, I was just going to say, many people are one incident away from falling into some kind of financial crisis. And I had said that in a meeting in June of 2019, 1 year prior to a pandemic hitting us. So I don't know of anybody who has not been financially impacted in such a way that it has become a very concern of being able to pay all of their basic needs, pay for the basic needs. And for many of us, when we're already cost burden, paying more than 30% of our total income for our housing costs, that is just one more thing that puts us right to that very edge of that financial cliff. And so I would say for all of us, don't be a NIMBY, which stands for not in my backyard, be a YIMBY, yes, in my backyard. Again, this is a community-wide, a regional, a statewide, a national issue. We need to come together and learn to create change with using our voices, to Chris's point.
I just want to say, please use your voices, as Chris said, but also recognize that having a roof and a door that you can lock over your head and at your doorstep can be a transformative situation for people. So I want to just leave you with a very brief quote from an Ording Veterans Village member, which opened just this past June. RJ experienced homelessness off and on for the past 37 years. He's an Army veteran. He's been clean and sober for over 20 months and recently enrolled in college. Here's what he had to say. I have been given a chance to rediscover what it is to actually live a life that's worth living. So many things to be happy about, to be enjoyed, to understand, and to appreciate. I think the biggest thing that has hit me the most is being appreciative. We have the power to transform lives by providing housing. We can transform our communities and people's lives. Let's go do it.
And Jackie, any last words?
Yeah, thank you. I just want to say that one, seeing housing as a basic human right, and also acknowledging that for many of us, we're not one paycheck away. We've been in crisis, in a state of crisis from the existence, right, of our birth. That being said, one, welcome you all to engage and right, lean in. There's many areas across our county. Happy to share those in detail of where you can tap in and leverage your voice. And I also want to make a comment of, right, I think oftentimes we are naive, having, right, being in crisis and living through, right, these challenges. It's easy to say, you just have to do this. You just have to send this. You just have to contact this person. I just need you to email this, or you just have to go there. We just need to be mindful that until someone, one, has safety and security, they're operating in scarcity. So asking something, again, someone, right, who's in crisis, an additional step. That's why, one, we need to actively advocate, one, to support. We know, right, we know what data says. So we need to, right, lean into these challenges, but be mindful of what we're asking and who we're asking it of. Thank you.
Thank you. Paula, I don't know if you want to put up the resource slide. I know we're out of time, so I want to close today by thanking everyone for joining. We really appreciate your time and the discussion today. We will do our best to answer some of the questions that we couldn't get to and connect you with resources or answers, especially for some of the more specific ones. So if you shared your email, we will try to get back to you as soon as possible, or staff will follow up. But a heartfelt thank you to our panelists for sharing their time and information and knowledge with this group. I am very grateful for all of your hard work that you're doing in this space, and I hope that this was informative and helpful. And I hope that you take the information that you learned today and share it with people in your networks, and appreciate everyone again. So thank you all for coming. Have a great rest of the day.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you. Paula, we will get you a list of resources and books to include you to your email.
That sounds great. Thank you.
Yeah, we had a couple people share their emails, so we can follow up with a list of resources. That's great.
Yeah, awesome. Will you also perhaps capture the question and answers? And so I know that someone dropped something in at the end.
Yeah.
That we weren't able, it's still going, never mind.
Yeah.
Folks are dropping stuff in, but I think it would be important, yeah, to just reference as it talks about, right, the law enforcement and the general budget, how much funding has been allocated.
Yeah. Yeah, we will, we'll wait to close the meeting. Yeah.
Perfect.